states to metropolitan planning organizations. The bill also provided much more flexibility in how this money could be spent and set aside pots of money to fund bicycle and pedestrian projects. Moynihan rushed the bill through committee before the highway lobby knew they faced a serious threat. I did not think they would go as far as they did, said Thomas J. Donahue, president of the American Trucking Associations in April of 1991. I don't think anybody did. Moynihan didn't get everything he wanted by the time the bill finally passed Congress several months later, but he was coming from a position of strength. With the interstate program passing into history, the road builders needed to demonstrate there was still need for a strong national presence in transportation. And the new bill broadened the coalition that supported this continued federal role. The Interstate Surface Transportation Efficiency Act, universally known as ICE-T, transformed the landscape for bicycling advocates. The new law gave metropolitan areas a big role in transportation planning and allowed localities and states more flexibility to shift money among different modes of transportation. In addition, two new programs were created: Transportation Enhancements and Congestion Mitigation and Air Quality Improvement, CMAQ, that were aimed in part at funding bicycle and pedestrian projects. The bill also included $180 million over 6 years specifically for trail projects. All told, funding for bike and pedestrian projects, quite frequently the two modes benefit from the same projects, climbed from $23 million in 1992 to a high of $427 million in 2004. In the overall scheme of things, it was still a relatively small share, less than 2% of the federal highway fund. But advocates could suddenly compete for real money and start thinking seriously about building bikeway networks. Years later, Ben Gomberg, Chicago's bike coordinator, spoke reverently when he listed all of the bike projects he's funded with congestion mitigation money. There are two favorite words on my list, he quipped. One is my wife's name, and the other is CMAQ. And, really, it did make a difference. Because of this ICE-T, I had that Eastside Esplanade to ride on. Several other projects around the Portland area. And it got the bike industry back involved. All of a sudden, they realized there was a pot of money to pursue. They started putting money into lobbying. I go into much more detail how they sort of hesitantly got into that, but sort of really started to form a national coalition. They started funding groups and advocates who would go around the country getting local bike groups started up. Portland didn't need such encouragement. We started a group here, the Bicycle Transportation Alliance, really right around the time that ICE-T passed. But I know it sounds kind of boring and wonkish maybe, but it really did change the landscape. Now, the next selection I wanted to read to you was about a little bit of a trip that I took to the Netherlands back in 2005. I heard about a group going from the city, and I really just jumped at the opportunity to go along with this group, to sort of tour around the country, see the different things that were happening, and I'll just describe a little bit of what it was like to get there. Roger Geller's eyes danced with pleasure as he intently watched the street scene along the Amstel River on an unseasonably warm and sunny day in Amsterdam in late fall. An elderly couple leisurely pedaled in unison along a lane of cobblestones and casually turned left onto a busy bridge that leads over the river. Another couple with a toddler nestled on a small seat in front of the handlebars of the dad's bike rattled by and slowed for just a moment at the intersection before forging onward. Moments later, a young woman rode over the bridge, carefully balancing a wrapped package of food flat in one hand. An eye-catching red Ferrari convertible rumbled down the lane. The couple inside happily chatted as they meandered along, not going much faster than the bikes around them. A tram whooshed by over the bridge as cyclists streamed around the vehicle. "Look how close everybody comes and nobody seems to mind," said Geller as we sat at an after cafe table. "It's a complicated dance and everybody knows the steps." It is also for people like Geller, Portland's bicycle coordinator, almost a religious affirmation. Back home in a relatively bike-friendly city like Portland, even in a relatively bike-friendly city like Portland, it's hard to stay true to your vision. The vast majority climbs into their cars for almost every trip, and they can't imagine it ever being any different. After a while, if you're a bike advocate, it wears you down. But in the Netherlands, you can restore your faith. No Western country, with the possible exception of Denmark, has a cycling culture so rich, so nurtured by government, and so seemingly enduring. fly to Schiphol Airport, jump on a train to central Amsterdam, and if you're so inclined, tune out the busy freeway you parallel for a few miles, and you will be in the middle of a city of 750,000 where, on any given day, half the population is out on a bike. The effect is roughly akin to an American communist traveling to Cuba and finding that, in truth, Fidel won free and fair elections, there are no political prisoners, and socialism allows the Cuban people to live in well-fed, beautiful harmony. Ever since I started hanging around bike folks, I'd wanted to experience Dutch cycling. I lost count of the number of bike advocates who told me about their life-changing trip to Amsterdam or other bike legendary cities in Holland like Delft or Groningen. So I jumped at the chance, sorry, a little repetition here, to spend a week in the Netherlands with a group of bike advocates and city officials from Portland. I arrived in Amsterdam earlier on a Sunday morning, emerging from Central Station to see one lone bicyclist on an otherwise deserted street. A fellow wearing leather chaps but no pants. Just a working stiff from the Red Lake District heading home, I guess. I dumped my luggage at my hotel, where I was also able to rent one of the small fleet of bikes that kept on hand for guests. I rode around by myself for a while, trying to gain a sense of how to navigate the separated bikeways that snake along next to roads, through parks, and sometimes down the middle of a sidewalk. Later I met Geller and we set off on a tour of the city, guided by a map from a web page, set up to show off Amsterdam's bikeways. As the streets began to fill with more traffic, realized that one of our toughest challenges was being assertive about taking the right of way. You will hardly find a stop sign in Amsterdam, indeed in the whole country. I had to deal with the Idaho stop law. And we learned to watch the shark's teeth found at almost every intersection. If the teeth of the white painted triangles are pointed at you, yield to oncoming traffic. If they're in the opposite direction, you have the right of way and you're expected to take it. That's where the dance comes in. Falter because you don't trust the other cyclists and drivers, and everyone gets annoyed, at least mildly so, although Amsterdammers are accustomed to clueless tourists. If you're the kind of cyclist used to riding in American cities, it doesn't take long for Amsterdam's bike magic to wash over you. Here you feel like a part of the majority, not the oddball. Like most everyone else, we rode heavy one-speed bikes that discouraged us from setting a torrid pace. And in fact, we didn't feel much need to rush. We didn't worry about sprinting past potentially dangerous traffic situations because there usually weren't any. When you were sharing a street with cars, generally on low-speed neighborhood streets, you were not wondering when to take the lane or when to stay to the side. That's simple in Amsterdam. If you're in front of a car, you just stay in front. Motorists know they have to poke along behind you until they're given the lane. Geller and I rode through Amstel Park and stopped at a T-shaped intersection to check our bearings. In the U.S., this kind of intersection wouldn't cause most drivers more than a moment's thought. A road from the park dead-ended at a boulevard where cars in both directions had the right of way. Here it was more complicated because an off-street bicycle path came through the park and intersected with another path that paralleled the boulevard. Sorry, that might be a little confusing to follow, but stick with me. An American traffic engineer would see plenty of potential for conflict. I watched an older couple in a station wagon prepare to take a right off the boulevard to drive through the park. They halted just before the intersection as the woman in the passenger seat craned her neck to make sure no one was coming down the bike path to the right of the car. As it turned out, they had to wait at least 30 seconds while all of the cycle traffic cleared. I watched closely, struck by how not even a hint of irritation came across their faces. They clearly recognized it as just part of the dance. We rode along toward a bike and pedestrian bridge and watched a man on a bike with a large wooden box on the front, never had seen one of those before at that point, slowly pedal up and over the span. 3 young kids were seated in the box, staring out like little potentates. "There's the answer," cried Geller, to the woman who says, "How am I going to get around? You can do it." Well, that would be an interesting sell to your minivan driving mom back in the States. All right, my last section, since we're in Portland, I felt like I have to read a little something just right there in Portland, and it's kind of mostly just for fun about how sometimes bike stuff can surprise you. You think that it's all sort of intuitive and obvious, but it often isn't. So at any rate, here I'm talking about Portland's bike culture. One of the things I found most intriguing about Portland's exploding bike scene was how it could build community in the unlikeliest of ways. For example, I had been reading on the SHIP list, this is a listserv for local cyclists, for more than a year about people moving, as in literally